Back in those days, there was no new space industry. And in fact, when we first presented what we were doing to the European Space Agency, they were saying, yeah, not something we're ever going to use in the agency. And now they sign our contracts.
Space is humanity's greatest laboratory. Defense is democracy's strongest shield. And today, in workshops, in laboratories, in startups, a new generation rises, not to observe history, but to write it, where every innovation above drives progress below, where every breakthrough in defense preserves our freedom to create. Behind every breakthrough stands a founder with a story. Now these stories emerge to light the path for those who follow. Welcome to Rockets and Radars.
You started a space company while doing your PhD. 7 years later, you stepped down as a CEO. 2 years after that, the company is taken public and the stock goes 6x up. You're opening offices in Singapore and Washington, D.C. You think you made it. Then 2019 hits, major contracts cancelled, you recover. Then 2023, the stock crashes significantly. The CEO you brought in steps down. The company almost dies, but somehow you survive. And in 2025, 18 years after founding, you report your first profitable quarter. That's Lars' incredible journey with GomSpace, the full roller coaster. And if you're an early stage space founder, this is the conversation you really want to hear. Before we get into the journey, I really want to get into a high level picture over what the GomSpace actually is.
NewSpace is one of the early new space companies in Europe, starting in 2007. And we were very focused on satellite technology initially, CubeSats, nanosatellites, now microsatellites, and soon mini satellites. So we've been on the journey of developing technology for new space, and it's now increasingly transitioning from helping our customers with demonstration to actually be in operations with base infrastructure.
Great. Before we get into the founding story, I want to go even further back to 2001. You are a student at the Aalborg University at this time, and you start working on the Aalborg University CubeSat project, one of the Europe's first CubeSats. Very curious, what pulled you into this specific industry, satellites? Were you always the space-obsessed kid, or was there anything else that hooked you in?
I always had a strong interest in space, but I didn't expect to have a career in space. But when I was at Aalborg University, Denmark just launched the Ørsted satellite, and then the professors were starting this initiative of a student satellite, and I saw a note on the whiteboard. I think it was fifth semester. We returned back from summer holidays, and the note asked anybody who wants to help build a satellite, go to this room on this date, and there we were.
Let's move on to 2003, where the previously mentioned Aalborg University CubeSats launches. Initially, it works for 2.5 months and then dies. Later on, you were also part of another project in 2005 with SSETI Express with 32 universities, and this specific satellite dies after 12 hours. And usually most people would see those as failures and quit in the industry and do something else. And I'm very curious, what made you think, let's start a company doing this, if you had that thought at that time?
So the experience I had through those two projects was just fantastic. The idea that as a small team, you get to build a complete satellite, you get to understand not just during the programming, but you need to understand the mechanics, the software, the programmatics, the testing. You need to understand everything that there is in building a spacecraft. And you get to work with a lot of intelligent people who share that interest. That was a transforming experience. So having tried that on 2 satellites, and yes, they were very early NewSpace satellites, not fully successful, but just demonstrating that a small team is able to build a satellite, launch it, and get some feedback. That was transformative. So that fueled me to say, okay, how can I continue doing this?
What was the size of the team, by the way?
On Aalborg University, we started 70 students in that room. But by the time we came to the launch, we were 5 students during the heavy
5?
lifting.
Wow.
And some 10 older students who were also taking part in it. CT Express, there was probably 100 people involved, and that was from like 15 different nations, and we were working together over the internet. designing and building the satellite. So that brought a whole international dimension to the collaboration also. That was extremely giving.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, around this period, you are doing your PhD, and at some point you realize I'm not cut out to be a career researcher. That's, I think, a scary realization when you are years into a PhD. What was the moment where you knew you are going to not follow that path and start a company? What was going on in your head at that point?
But that realization of not becoming a career scientist, I had already before I started the PhD. But when we go back to 2003, 4, 5, I mean, there was no new space industry. So what I did in the student satellite project is I couldn't go anywhere and get a job to do. So I had to hang around in the academic environment, not bad at all. But for me, the PhD was a means to the end of being allowed to still work on satellite more than it was the research that fueled.
And then you made a decision to actually create a company with two other colleagues called GomSpace. Tell us more about where the name of the company came from.
Yeah, so something we started working on alongside our PhDs to, okay, what when we run out of PhD time, what do we need to do with ourselves? Okay, let's start a company. And at the time, the younger generation of students were calling us the grumpy old men because we were advising them and we said, oh, we launched this and we launched that and that didn't work. So please uh, curb your ambitions, make it simpler, do what we did. So that became a nickname for the little group, and we kept that as a title for the company when we started up.
No, pretty easy to remember, I think, and pretty straightforward. I like that. Very curious about the practicalities at this point in time. Have you ever think about how to split the equity with your two co-founders, or have you just went equally in the very beginning?
We went in as a team, splitting equally.
And regarding your co-founders, you work together, so I think it was pretty easy to figure that out who you are going to work with for long years from that time. But if you didn't know those guys, how would you approach finding your co-founders?
That's a good question. I would definitely have long hours of conversations with potential other co-founders and understand where there is a shared ambition and also a shared set of values, how to get there.
And how do you find out what values you have in common?
That's also a good question. I guess that comes from spending time together and having deep conversation.
That's a fair point. Okay, great. Now let's get into the very first years of the company, 2007 to 2010. Can we zoom in a bit in the timeline, and can you give us more detail on what have you been actually doing those first 3 years?
Yeah. And again, we have to remember that back in those days, there was no new space industry. And in fact,
Mm.
when we first presented what we were doing to the European Space Agency, they were saying, yeah, super interesting for students, not something we're ever going to use in the agency. And now they sign our contract. So the world was really different then in space than it is today. But we started helping universities with the Aalborg University experience. So universities in Asia, universities in Europe who wanted their students to build a satellite. And they needed some advice on the process, so that's consulting. And they needed some products for some of the areas that they were not able to put together themselves with the students. So that's how we started. And we actually had commercial revenue from the first month working as consultants for universities and starting to do prototype products.
Super interesting. And when did you transform from that model or format of a company into a more commercial one? Was there any milestone or tipping point where you went from consultancy to something else?
But I think in a way we were very commercial from the start. We were selling what we had, knowledge, product prototypes, and then gradually it grew into products and services that were more structured. So that happened over a long period of time. It was not a startup where we say, okay, let's go to the basement with a couple of millions, and then we come up in 2 years with a product, and then we see if the market is still there. We were engaging with potential customers from day one and steering the business according to the next little contract, and then building products incrementally as we were servicing the customer.
No, fair point. The environment was a bit different, but still the basics are always right even now. Okay, great. Regarding external employees, when did you make the first outside hire?
I think there was 1.5 year in, and we simply needed more capacity for helping on software. So we hired one of the old student bodies from the projects at Aalborg University.
And how do you think about hiring? And what I'm also curious, how did you think about hiring back then? And how do you think about hiring right now? What are you looking for apart from the things that you mentioned when looking for co-founders?
Yeah, also a very good question. At the time, and again, we were really beginners in starting a business coming straight from studies going in. And I think what we valued initially was somebody we knew from the network, somebody we worked with as students, so we knew what that person was able to contribute. So it was low risk getting those people involved in the operation. Today, as GomSpace, of course, we hire many people, and many of them we do not know. And here we really focus on ensuring that they show up with the right value. And especially when you start scaling the startup, because it's easy to have alignment if you are 4 or 5 or 10 people in the room. But when you start becoming 20, 30, 50, then you cannot be on top of everything. So it's really important that there's a shared sense of purpose and people um, live the values of the company to deliver consistently.
Now I will zoom out and I want to ask a challenging question. Have you ever hit a rock bottom moment in those first years of the company building? A moment that you thought, damn, this is not going to work?
It was always challenging because, as I said, there was not that much market at the time. So we were always looking for the next little contract to keep the cash flow going. And for sure, there were periods of time where on the 20th of the month, I wouldn't know how to pay salaries at the end of the month. Somehow I managed to pay the salaries, but then you have to pay the taxes on the 10th after. So then you have 10 days to get the money in for paying the taxes. So there's definitely been some very hard times during the first years, but I didn't think this is not going to succeed.
Is there any learning that you got from this period that you use in your day-to-day life even now?
There's definitely a lot of learnings from that period about what it means to run a business, keep the cash in the bank, how to prioritize, but also to, as we say in Danish, grow a bit of hair on your chest, knowing that even through tough times, you will manage and you'll come out on the other side. And part of being successful is about be able to stay in the game, and then take the opportunities when they show up.
Okay, great. We move further through the timeline, November 2013, when you launched the GomX1, your first real satellite and nanosatellite designed to track aircraft from space. And I'm very curious, why did you choose aircraft tracking out of all of the other problems you could have tackled?
We're still very in a very early market phase for NewSpace technology. So companies were developing satellites, but very few knew what we were developing them for. So everybody was, what's the application? What's the application? And of course, we wanted to develop applications and we wanted to develop demonstrations that could show that these satellites provide input to the economy, providing inputs that are relevant to everyone. So the obvious one was tracking ships, but people were already doing that. So we were looking, okay, what about aircraft? Are they sending out any signals? What can we do with that? And especially also because at the time there were a few incidents of aircraft getting lost flying over oceanic areas because there's no awareness exactly where these aircraft are when they cross the continents.
No, that's a real problem to solve. And what I'm curious to pick your brain on, if there are any listeners here that are still in the very early stages and they have figured it out which problem to try solving, what would you tell them? What is the best way to figure that out? What direction they need to take at this early stage?
I think it's quite a circumstantial question to the kind of technology you are developing. But I think for most new technology, it's about transitioning from being excited about a technology and having customers that are excited about the technology to have applications and customers who's excited about what that technology can do for you. So I think it's important for founders and entrepreneurs to be excited about the technology, but really start making a roadmap that brings you to provide a clear customer value as early as possible.
Great one. Great. Let's get back to the launch of GomX1, which launched successfully and it worked. It collected more than 3.5 million frames with more than 2 years of operation. And I think I can call that a real proof of a concept moment. Did it change anything for you as a company?
It did. At that time, we were a company of about 10 people and in a growing phase. And for sure, the demonstration we did with GomX1 caught a lot of attention worldwide and helped bring in customers for our products and consultancy business. So it was a very important moment for the company. It really helped provide some stability by being recognized worldwide as a top innovator and capable of delivering such a mission, which was quite remarkable at the time.
You cannot beat the flight heritage, right? And regarding consultancy, how much percent of your time were you back then dedicated on the consultancy part versus building satellites like the next mission that we'll discuss in a bit?
It was probably half and half.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Let's get into the second mission that I just mentioned, GomX2, that actually was launched in less than a year after your first big success. It launched on Antares rocket, but it exploded 6 seconds after liftoff. Can you tell us more about what was going on in your head at that time?
Mhm. So I was not seeing the launch, no, not in person, also not virtually, because I was sitting having a meeting with a general of a certain air force about the satellite we were selling them, and he wanted to know if I thought insurance was needed, and I said no. That's usually quite expensive. At that time, it was.
Mm.
And then I got the text message on my phone with the picture of the exploding satellite. So I had to play it cool and then get out of the meeting and then call back a bit later and understand what was going on in there.
But anyway, after a while, you then realized that the satellite survived the explosion and was recovered from the wreckage undamaged. And I want to reflect a bit on this moment. What did that moment teach you, not just about hardware, but about resilience in general in this industry?
It's just one of many examples how bad things happen and you survive and you move on and you learn from it. Of course, in that case, I mean, we were not responsible for the rocket blowing up. It's just shit happens in life and in business, and sometimes you just need to stand up and move on.
Same year, after proving GomX1 that works, after surviving the rocket explosion with GomX2, you made a different kind of decision at that time. You stepped down as a CEO and you brought in Niels Boost that became the CEO of GomSpace for some years from that point. And walk me through how you knew it was the time to do that decision.
So we had been going for 7 years, and as mentioned before, at times it was tough. It was definitely a lot of work. We also had good progress, but it was about time to find a way to have more scalability. And I also knew with myself I couldn't keep working 150% for all of my career. And when being the CEO is fantastic in many ways, but there's also a lot of things you have to do because you're the CEO, which distracts you from maybe where you can make your most important contributions. Or where you feel most excited to delivering to the organization. And at the same time, I was also becoming a father and having kids to look after. So a lot of things just make sense to say, okay, now we're taking the next step in the company development, and I can focus on some things that are a bit closer to what is really my core.
If you would give advice to other technical founders watching this or listening this who might need to step aside eventually, what would be your advice to them? How do they actually know when is the time? What are the signs of making this decision or similar decision as you did?
But I guess if as a early stage CEO you're even thinking about it, well, then you know there's something to take serious. I guess for many
Yeah.
people they have a different mindset. They would never think about it. So if you are thinking about it, be curious, explore your feelings and your priorities and what you want to do, and think about that. Depending, of course, what your ambition is. This do I need to be in this company for another 3 years and then I want to shoot it away? Do I want to be here for most of my career? What's my career plan in this? At some point, you have to make your career plan, or you just get overwhelmed by all of the work.
I will get back a bit to finding Niels. How did you find that guy to run your company that you just made 7 years ago?
Now, he was on the board from the start, so he was already in the network when we started.
And if he wasn't on the board, how would you find the next Niels?
Then I would use my network, but that would have been much more difficult because it would also distract a lot of time solving that problem from other problems we had at the time. So I think you are always, to some extent, depending on what you can bring in from your network when you take steps with your company.
I want to reflect a bit after Niels has officially become a CEO. What was the biggest change that went through the company when you stepped down? Were there any big changes that you disagreed with?
Of course, I prepared myself that things will be different and another person will be taking decisions I will not always agree with, and for sure, but I was prepared for that. But it was really a successful move in the sense that one of the problems we had before the change is that there was kind of a limit cycle between the more time I spent on the market, the bigger the order book was, but we were not always able to keep up the deliveries. So when I switched to delivery focus, then the order book was not developing. So by doing this move and together, we're able to focus on building both order book and delivering and growing just 200% in the first year. So it really
Wow.
accelerated the growth and kept everybody busy for sure, but it really developed the company. So we went from about 12 people when Nils took over to 25 people a year later to cope with the fact that we kind of opened the sack on the pipeline and started getting the orders in that was there.
Super interesting. I want to understand a bit more on your role.
Mhm.
I'm very curious. Were you still deeply involved with guiding the company from the very top alongside Niels, or were you really focusing on things that you simply loved and fully trusted Niels to ride the train?
I was having the role of chief commercial officer, so I was working very hard with the customers bringing the business in, and that in alignment with Nils and the other leaders in the company.
Then GomSpace launched its third successful launch with ESA, GomX3, and since that point the company just went into a hypergrowth. So let's get into June 2016 when the company went public on the Nasdaq in Stockholm, Sweden. You raised 100 million Swedish krona. And I'm very curious, what was the thought process inside a company of going IPO? Why did you choose to go that road at that point?
We are still in the early market here. It was clear that we were onto something. Our technology was successful in space. We did good demonstrations. We did ESA projects. Starting to invest in machinery, clean rooms, starting to invest more in development would require more capital. At the time, European venture capital was not interested in space. Too esoteric. We don't know about that. Going to the US was also not something we really considered at the time. So we're thinking, okay, how can we get capital into this company and how can we develop a technology company where we are still in a reasonable good level of control of the direction of the company? And then Nils got maybe a little crazy idea to why don't we go to the stock market um, and within a year we managed to go through the process and do that.
If you were in GomSpace now, this year in 2025, what do you think would be the best path to finance your growth?
I think that the startup environment has changed a lot in the last 20 years, especially in Europe. There's a lot more interest in startups, both from money, uh, stakeholders, VCs, institutions providing support, but also from the population is starting to understand, and it's probably because of the Shark Tank show on TV. They're starting to connect to the startup. When we started, they were like, "You're crazy. Why? You can get a full salary, and what about vacation?" So I think the whole environment around startup is different today. So there are more options, and of course you have to choose wisely. Where do you get the money to fuel the growth? An IPO is probably not one of the first steps to take.
Let's get back into the story. The stock soared, and in 15 months, it almost 6x'd. You open offices in Singapore, Washington, D.C., and your company hits more than 80 employees. For some people, you are living the dream every founder imagines. What was 2017 for you like? Did your lifestyle change?
Not really, for a number of reasons. One being just very, very busy with handling all of the growth, didn't leave a lot of time for for reinventing your life. Second, as part of the IPO, we were in a lockup agreement. So yes, the stocks were high and it wasn't entirely rational. There was a lot of momentum building around the stock. It wasn't the time to go crazy.
No, fair point. But anyway, you went into hypergrowth.
Mhm.
You grew a team from 10 to more than 80 people in a couple of years. And I think that's pretty brutal growth for sure. And I believe there had to be something that broke down. So I'm very curious, what broke first, if you remember? Your culture, your processes, or your people?
The culture. I mean, you
Hmm.
go into that growth phase as there's a culture around being a startup, doing the things you do in space, and the entrepreneurship that you're all doing in the company. And of course, when you bring in first 80, then was 200 people, within a couple of years. Well, you kind of get the culture you bring in, and it's a little bit mishmash of everything, and some of the original culture is still there. But when you build organizations that fast, the key challenge as leadership is maintaining alignment, both in values but also in actions.
Back then, if you knew what you know now, what would you do differently regarding growth?
Now, I would definitely be spending more time being explicit around the culture that we have in the company. I want to maintain or develop and build that more into the process. At the time, we were just busy plugging the holes, like, okay, we need some more software engineers. What can we have? Okay, you go
Yeah.
there. So being a little more deliberate on how we want the culture to develop as part of the growth.
Did you fix the culture problem at some point since that point?
Culture is a continuously evolving, but we're definitely in a very different stage today than at that time, and I think it's a new culture, but it's a very healthy culture and a culture that really supports the growth we're having now.
Okay, nice to see that. And let's get into the next, I can call this a chapter of the company. While 2017 was the ultimate peak of GomSpace, 2019 hit a bit differently. You got major order cancellations.
Mhm.
You had to cut down on the employees. And I'm very curious what was, again, going through your head as well as the head of your colleagues at the top of the company.
A bit of despair, obviously. So we got an order with it's an early market. There's the big orders don't grow on the trees, and the big initiative comes from visionaries in the market that wants to do stuff. But sometimes plans are a little bit crazy, or would say early to the market. Some of the financing is not always available to bring them all of the way. And we brought on a customer who had a fantastic vision and had good traction and a good take on getting the financing also. And had we been successful together with the customer, we would have changed the world in a small way. But they ran out of financing at a very critical time for GomSpace, and we had to scale that back the organization very significantly. And that's not fun. It's not fun at all. Again, we were still there afterwards. We still had other contracts. We had good people. We had more experience.
What was the hardest part at that point? Was it the firing of your colleagues, or was it something else?
Firing is hard, but it's also good that we are in a country like Denmark. You know, there's social welfare. You know that there's good opportunities in the job market, and especially among the engineers in North Jutland, you see they often move around to some of the companies that are making big moves. So it's also easy to see that as soon as we start letting people go, they were absorbed elsewhere. So of course it was tough, but maybe it wasn't as bad as I expected.
Was there anything that you would do differently when you look back at that period?
I think, I mean, be open with employees about what's going on, and be honest about the situation, and try to help everyone as best possible.
How much honesty and transparency you think it's healthy to actually have with your colleagues or employees? Sometimes too much transparency could be also bad, so I'm very curious, what is your take on this?
I think that the more people know, the better they are able to act and plan. Of course, there can be sensitivities also as a listed company, but something we are doing today in the company, and is a significant part of the culture, is to be extremely open and honest about everything that goes on, but also requiring employees to be able to handle that. Not saying we were not that at the time previously, but today it's something we really emphasize in our culture.
Thanks for sharing that. And one last thing about this period. Were you ever scared or doubtful that the company wouldn't make it in this period? And where did that come from? Was it the uncertainty or?
Of course, when you need to make that big adjustments and it's a question of money in the bank and investor confidence, you can see, I mean, that you have to think in multiple scenarios, because there always are multiple scenarios. And one of them is not making it, but it's just one of many scenarios. So definitely saw it as a in the outcome space, but not the one to focus on.
Okay. Again, good diplomatic answer. Let's get into the next big milestone. While 2019 was pretty tough for the company, the period within 2022 and 2023 tested you in a whole different way. In October 2022, one of your customers suspended their contract, and you ended up with unpaid invoices, which represented about 50% of your annual revenue. And then in January 2023, Niels Boos stepped down after 9 years of being CEO. Walk me through that period. This must have been even harder, and I'm very curious if there is anything that you remember from that stick with you until now.
Yeah, well, so yeah, it was a very hard period, because we were again in a situation where we onboarded a very important customer with a big vision, but where we together ran into problems executing the program and had to scale down. And it's a little bit, oh no, again, but it had to be done at the time. And this time was a little bit more grave, in the sense that there were less money in the bank, so we also needed to go out and run the period very, very tight for a period of time after that.
And then the snowball rolled even more. While you had some internal dynamics in September that year, your stock went down by 19% from the 2017 peak.
Mhm.
And back then you were building the company for 16 years, and Again, I want to understand what was going through your head at that point.
No, but at that time it was about, so there's return on investment. That's of course important. It's important to me. It's important to the stakeholders and the shareholders of the company, but also the return the return on experience. I think in that situation I was not thinking so much about the money, but I was thinking about all of the experience we built in the company at that time, was 16, 15 years, and really wanting to see that experience would continue to be productive in the future and create the basis for new growth. So it's a mindset on identifying what needs to be done and then focus on that, and then not focus on what can go wrong.
I want to expand on the last thought. If there are any listeners that might be going through a very hard time, it might not be very similar to you because you were a very special case for the NewSpace industry, but what would be your ultimate advice for them while they are going through the very hard times? As you have gone through it twice, what would be your ultimate thought process that you want to share with them?
Yeah, they have to make sure that they also have a real life, because if everything you have is the business and the business suffered, then you suffer all of the time. If you also have a family, if you take your mountain bike in the forest in the weekend, if you have other interests, then you can distance you a little bit from it and see, okay, the business is suffering. I'm doing what I can to fix it, but I'm okay.
Huh. Has your, let's call it work-life balance changed since the very beginning of building that company in comparison with this hard period and the current date?
Absolutely. Of course, workload changes over time. There are tougher periods and less tough periods. It's always high, but compared to the early years, it's definitely for me in a more healthy place right now. Healthy for the long term.
If you actually, if you met your past self in the very beginning, would you tell yourself work less, make sure that you have balance?
No, I wouldn't say, because at the time, when it was 20 years ago, you were in a different place in life. You had less commitment, more energy. You could do that work for a period of time. But if you think you can work like that your whole life and not have ups and downs on the intensity, then you're going to burn out.
Okay, thank you for sharing that again. And let's get into a big milestone, March 2023, where you got Carsten Drachmann come in as the new CEO. The strategy inside the company shifted from chasing growth to focusing on profitability and cash flow. After 16 years of building the company one way, how did you process that huge change in the overall strategy? Was it relief or was it difficult to accept?
Both at the same time. I think after the ups and downs, it was clear that we had to try something new, and Carsten brought in a fresh take on where to focus. But of course, it also meant a lot of change that had to be absorbed and learned. But overall, it's been a good transformation for the company.
And one last thing I wanted to talk about within this time period. If you look back now, what do you think were the core issues within the 2022-2023 period? What would you tell other founders to watch out for if we reflect on that again?
Yeah, but then I have to go a little bit back, because the problems in 2022
No, let's
came
get into that.
from big contracts, a couple of them that we signed during the COVID crisis. And to some extent, it's clear that when you can't go out and meet your customer, when you can't sit around the table co-developing the project plans, and you are going into the customer relationship less aligned than in, say, under normal circumstances. So part of the problems there was the difficulty in getting the project on the right track with the customer from the start, but also growing an organization to take on big commitments when people were in lockdown. So we have people who are starting to work in country X, and they can only move to the designated office half a year later and meet their colleagues. So there are a lot of things that made it a little bit difficult. And then, of course, when we ran into trouble with one of them, that created a lot of ripple effect in the project portfolio that was difficult to deal with and gave the crisis. In terms of advice, I mean, you have to think about your resiliency, and you have to think about your how you are exposed to individual customers. If you have one or two big customers, well, you are very much exposed to the actions of those two. But that's plain vanilla advice to everyone. But when you're a founder and there's one guy who's ready to give you a big, interesting contract, you're not going to say, no, I wait until there are three that are able to give me a contract at the same time. So some of these problems, despite all the good advice, any founder, entrepreneur would go for it.
Yeah, the theory looks good, but in the moment, as you just mentioned, it's stupid to not focus on that anchor customer, right? So, okay. Anyway, again, good reflection. Let's get into one of the last milestones of the company, which I call the comeback. Let's get into 2024, which became the turnaround year. You start the winning contracts again, Unseen Labs, Singapore customers, UK universities. You achieved for the first time positive free cash flow in years. Apart from the overall arching strategy, what do you think that changed inside company?
So definitely Carsten came in with a fresh take on how to lead the company, focusing a lot more on people and then technology and growth being secondary. And that helped create some of the realignment of the company and the culture that kind of washed out through the growth and the problems we had. So it created a much stronger organization to execute both the sales and the projects ensuring. So that was the big change.
Based on your perspective and experience, when do you think it's great to focus fully on growth as you did in a previous timeline and focusing on profitability in this industry with the current environment?
So I think it depends on your optics. In American optics, you would look at GomSpace and say, why are they not losing more money to grow faster? And in a European context, you would say, oh, yeah, finally, they're starting to get control of the finances. So it depends a little on what you expect of the company. Personally, I feel great that we are in control, that we are able to close really important contracts with commercial customers. And I see the way I see NewSpace right now is there's a lot of money coming in, but it gets very tied down to national states and what does this country want to do in space. And I think one of the core strengths of GomSpace right now is that we are one of the companies that actually can export what we do. We are not reliant on our own nation as the primary client of our development and our products. So I really like the approach to, as we did in the early days, running the business by finding the customers, closing the sale, delivering the business, and going back to the customer with the trust you built and take a bigger contract the next time. I like that approach.
Yeah, back to the basics, right?
Yes.
And I think the results really paid off. In Q1 2025, you reported your first positive net profit after 18 years. And you have seen the company for so long, you almost saw it die twice, and you are still here. What keeps you showing up? There are so many little cases of founders that stay in the companies for some long time. So just again, want to get into your head and understand the motivations here.
So I'm very much driven by curiosity. And when I go to work at GomSpace, every day there's something new. Whether it's something with a customer relation that's new, it's a new piece of technology, or it's new colleagues we're getting into the business. It's always moving. There's always something to learn, and there's always something to contribute that makes sense in the context of where we're going.
Just curious, have you ever thought of quitting and starting a new company from scratch?
Not really. I'm not married to GomSpace. I'm not going to be there for 100 years, but I mean, look where we've gone. I mean, when in 2003, when we built the student satellite, everybody thought it was that's really fun. Some students building a satellite, and now it's on the global agenda. We need the security and resilience from space from Europe, and the new space industry has to deliver. It's just been such an amazing journey to be part of for 25 years. So, I mean, I want to see what's happening next.
No, love your motivations. Great, and love the story as well. We have covered pretty a lot in this short time frame, and now I want to reflect over everything that we talk about in the last hour. For founders in the audience watching this, you have lived the full journey as we got into it, from academic spin out to IPO to near death to comeback to profitability. What do you think is the most important lesson you took from all of it that you want to share with the community?
Yeah, I think it's about resiliency. I mean, okay, not every startup story is the same, but it always starts with the hockey stick. Well, we're going to work hard for 2 years, then we'll come out of the basement, and then we're going to make a lot of money. That's not what's happening. It's ups and downs, and you have to be prepared for that, and you have to develop your personal resilience.
Resilience, that's the word of the episode. Great. Okay, let's get into the last part of the episode, which we call the rapid fire round questions. I have a few questions here pre-prepared. I'll ask you all of those, and I'm very curious what you think in a few sentences per each. So let's get into them. If you remember, what is the biggest mistake you have made as the CEO of GomSpace?
Looking back, when we started the company, there was no industry, there was no NewSpace. So you could argue that it would have been better to wait a few years to stay in the academic arena and see some of the technology developing a few steps more before launching a company. So I think there's a lessons learned about understanding the market dynamics.
Now I'll flip the card. What is the best decision you have ever made as the CEO of GomSpace?
I think that's the understanding that that I wanted to play a long game, and I had to manage my career, and I had to think about what contributions would I would like to do at certain, say, time periods in the company, and that involved also stepping down as the initial CEO.
Fair point, fair point. Okay, next one. If you started GomSpace tomorrow, would you even build in Europe?
So I believe very strongly in the European values, and I believe that we need to carve a position for Europe in the global political dynamics that's building on also on technology. So I would feel very motivated to develop a new company in Europe.
What do you think is the current status of the European space industry if you look into the global perspective, right? Looking not only in the US, but also in the other regions, in the, let's say, APAC region.
But it's definitely on the agenda now and the top political decision takers, which is good. But our approach in Europe is based very much on technology stimulation and less on demand stimulation. And that creates a lot of Me Too companies. So like every country now has a number of GomSpace like companies with somewhat similar skill sets. And it makes it difficult for customers to see what, I mean, there's just so much to choose from. I think in Europe there needs to be a more market-driven approach to avoiding contracts, having consolidation, and growing the best of breed.
Great one. Okay, next one. What is your most controversial opinion about the European space industry? And by controversial, I mean, what do you think is something that you think that nobody else thinks in the European space industry?
That's a tough one. It's back to my point before that we need to change the dynamics to buying satellites, buying space services, um, and not stimulating technology as much as we do today.
Nice. Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and story. This has been pretty amazing. I'm super excited, as I was in the very beginning. One bonus question. After everything, in what happened in GomSpace in your life, the highs and the lows, nearly losing it all twice, was it worth it in the end?
Absolutely. I mean, it beats an 8 to 4 job. Again, I'm driven by curiosity. I mean, even when you reflect the lows, well, there's a lot to learn. There was a lot to integrate into your next steps.
Awesome. Is there any last thing you would love to share with a space founder community that you think they should take from our chat today?
Think in, of course, preparing for the long ride, the resilience, but also think beyond the grants and the government subsidies and think about what's the real application this technology can provide, and make sure to get in contact with that group of end users as early as possible.
Yeah, commercial first. Great. Again, thank you so much for joining here. I really loved it. Hope you did too as well.
Absolutely. Pleasure.